I don't know if you remember this. Well, you probably don't. But many years ago, I got a call because Tom has always been very, very active in the whole cause of writers and in the importance of the life of the writer beyond just writing the scripts. You don't know what I'm going to say, do you? And I got a call years ago that you were trying to start some sort of group so that when people were asked to rewrite scripts, that they would call other writers or something. And I just remember at the time, this is like a somewhat pathetic story about myself, but I was just like, I've arrived. I'm getting called. I got a call from Tom Schulman, who wrote Dead Poets Society, and I'm just like, you know, and I just was picturing the meetings and like what we were going to eat and coffee and the conversations that we would have that would sort of be like, you know, the kind of things we were talking about here.
We were protecting ourselves from you. That was really
exactly. And it didn't. What was your idea about that group?
The idea was that writers would call other writers and ask their permission before rewriting. And a bunch of people, maybe you two, signed a little pledge saying this is what we'll do, and we did it. And
I did, because nobody was asking me to rewrite anybody else. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'll sign that.
It's easy when you're not being asked.
It's amazing that when you call people, you know, they usually are burnout and they just, you know, sort of want to tell you what they're trying to do, and you can. It helps the whole process, both getting along with the other writer and also understanding what the other writer's trying to do, and maybe continuing to be his or her voice in the process.
I just thought it was so gracious.
Happen?
It happens, yeah. I've ruined some people's scripts with their permission. So,
but do you still do that?
Maybe here tonight.
Do you do that? Do you do that now if you're being offered a rewrite, or?
Yeah, I've tried not to do them anymore because I feel awful after doing them. So no matter whether I have the other writer's permission or not, but I always call the other writer. And if they don't want me to, I don't. But they've never said no. They're usually just so surprised that somebody's calling them. But
yeah, I would be.
And I've had people call me, so you know, it's
that's so cool. You are my
a
God.
little bit more respect than just the way we always do. And the next step would be just to refuse to rewrite each other altogether. That would be a revolution.
Yeah. Well, that's obviously what you've done, correct?
Well, we tried, but
no,
I mean.
But you personally, I mean, I just heard you say that doesn't feel comfortable to you
anymore. Yeah.
That's interesting to me, because you don't hear that a lot.
I remember reading about expensive call girls saying that they have to spend all the money right away just because it feels bad. So they never have it, and that's the way it was with me. I just make this money and just have to do something with it because it just, you know. And after a while, I thought,
was it
what am I
mostly
doing?
black lingerie?
Well, no.
So after that, we'll do the usual elegant segue into. I went back and I watched What About Bob again, which I'd seen several times, and it's just truly got to be one of the funniest movies there is. And so simple. It's really, you know, other than the explosion at the end, but it's basically these very simple character scenes. And I found out from Tom today that Tom has not seen the movie since it came out. So I wanted to ask you why? How many years has it been?
Couple of decades.
Couple of decades.
No, I think it was 91, maybe.
But that's amazing to me that you haven't gone back and watched it.
I mean, I sometimes walk through the room and see, you know, my kids watching it or something, and I just walk out. It's too hard to sort of deal with. I mean, I find that about everything I've written is I just see all the mistakes and all the missed opportunities, and I just want to change it, and it's too late.
Even after all these years.
Yeah. I mean, particularly, after all these years, I think you just, for me anyway, none of them age well. So, and that's not necessarily specific to my own movies. A lot of it, and I find this with my kids, I go, oh, I gotta show you this movie. I love this when I was your age, or, you know, in my 20s, and I show it to them, and they're just, what is that? You know, these things, so many movies seem to not age. And obviously some that didn't seem so good at the time really do age well. So, but mine in particular don't age well. So,
That's so sad.
I know, it is sad.
Well, that to me, that speaks of a highly vocal, critical,
self-critical,
faculty, yeah.
miserable.
I'm sorry, but why do you think that yours in particular don't age well? I mean, you're just judging yourself
It's hard to
harshly?
tell.
I think, and I think that's part of the process that I go through anyway. I mean, to me, I finish a draft, and the first job is to sort of objectify it and say, okay, it can't get any worse than this, but what can I do to make it better? So I'm just constantly doing that every time I redo it. So it's always the job to rewrite it. And I think writing, the old cliche, writing is rewriting. So, and in order to rewrite, you have to say, okay, how can I make this better? What's wrong? Pick it apart. And so that doesn't stop when it's being shot or when it's done.
But in order to get the writing out, I mean, in order to make it better or to make it anything, you have to latch onto something as being okay. I mean, in other words, if you started Xing out all your ideas.
I mean, the truth is, during every draft, I let myself love it while I'm doing it. I just kind of, in a way that makes the rewriting easy because I'm so easy on myself during the writing process. But I try to just take the critic away and go, if this can make me laugh, maybe it's funny. Maybe it'll make other people laugh.
Right.
So if I love something and it tickles me, I just keep it in and I keep trying to add stuff that gets to me, and ultimately, I finish the draft. And then
So are your first drafts long?
Yeah. This one wasn't for some reason, but usually about 180 pages.
Oh, Tom,
just-
thank you. Thank you, Tom.
And it's
The kind of class this is. You get applause for saying 180 pages.
Tom.
it's
Rumel,
it's
you'll
the
get.
bane of my existence, let me tell you, because you get through and you just go, oh my God.
That's just so good to know. So you.
And that's
Otherwise
squeezed. That's final draft squeezed. I don't have anything to do but just start cutting.
I love this man. This makes me feel so much better.
Well, I mean, so it's easy. I mean, obviously, at a certain point, the rhythm of a movie should be, in a comedy. I mean, I think What About Bob turned out to be maybe 130 pages long, even what we shot. So,
Really?
But yeah, I mean, we just.
So you cut a lot in
every draft they would say, okay, we got to cut this down, and we'd go through and want to cut this, no, and let's add this here, and let's add that, and it just it got longer every time we tried to cut it. So. It was, but usually I'll finish a draft. It's 180, and then I just go through it with a chainsaw and get it down.
But do
pretty
you get
easily
do you
to
get that like
140.
sinking feeling when you're on about page 90 and you realize, gee, I'm really kind of
I'm not
only
even
in the
halfway through. I know. It's
I've been there.
so
where you're just
depressing.
going, huh?
Yeah, something's wrong, but I don't know what.
Do I really need the ending?
Exactly.
But the point is, you don't know yet what's wrong, so it's
You just have to finish it, and you've planned it. I mean, I outlined pretty extensively, so I have a pretty good idea what I'm going to do. In fact, I outlined so compulsively that it's almost written by the time I get through outlining it, just because I'm so nervous that when I get to the end, it's going to all fall apart, that I want to know it works before I even write it. So I'm planning.
And then do you
too much.
stick to your outline pretty
Yeah,
closely?
yeah. Although if I'm sensing as I'm going that something's off, I'll make changes. But generally, I look back and think, I stayed to the outline pretty closely, and I kind of live in terror that I'm going to get to the end, it's not going to work, and therefore the whole thing's going to fall down. So I go fast and I go, stick to the outline, hoping that my initial impulses about the ending were right.
Well, I want to. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning with What About Bob. The story was by Alvin Sargent and Laura Ziskin. So when they approached you, what was the story that they brought to you?
They had the idea of psychiatrists going on vacation during the month of August, and a patient who simply couldn't handle his psychiatrist being gone and would chase him up to his vacation home.
And that was all they had?
I think so, yeah. And that's all I remember. And so Alvin Sargent, it really worried me because Alvin is a great writer, and I didn't know him at the time, but I just thought if he's not doing this, something's wrong. You know, what's wrong with
Why
this?
don't-
that you're-
why don't you
why don't
want
you
it?
write it?
Yeah. Why are you throwing it back?
And he had written something that was sort of I think he had tried to write it, ended up writing something kind of serious, and he kept saying, I just can't write comedy. Now, Alvin is an incredibly funny guy, so I didn't really buy that. But at a certain point, I just loved the idea. It made me chuckle every time I thought of it. I thought, well, what the hell? You know, I'll take a shot with it. So,
So was the process, did you break the story with them, or then you sort of went off and...
they just, you know, Alvin and Laura are they just said, you go off and come back to us when you have some ideas. And I went back to their office and they said, what do you think? I started talking. They said, let's go up and talk to the studio about it. We didn't even, you know, when we went upstairs and talked to David Hoberman, and he just said, yeah, go write it. So.
By that time, did you kind of have this idea of the psychiatrist was going to go insane? And
yeah.
he
I
was
mean, the first thing, I mean, it's kind of a natural thought is how crazy can the patient drive the shrink? You know,
what is so funny is both Winnie and I, you know, watched the movie and admitted to each other that even though it seemed so obvious, neither one of us saw it coming. Even though I'd also seen the movie before, but it'd been a long time. That, oh, I get it now. He's going insane.
Mm-hmm.
As he's getting more sane. So
I didn't really see it coming. It seems like I should have, but it's really a neat. I mean, it's such an obvious twist on some level, but the way you do it, maybe the way you wrote that character, I really didn't realize that he was that the end was going to be that he was going to go stark raving mad. I mean,
well, the trick to him was to put him up as high as you can be at the beginning for a shrink. He's got this big book out. He's going on Good Morning America. He's at the top of his game. So it's hard to imagine that somebody as ineffectual as Bob Wiley is going to bring him down. I hope, anyway. That was the construct, you know. So I tried to surprise myself. I tried to make the Marvin character, the shrink, as clever as he could be at getting rid of Bob, so that, you know, he would just hold in that anger.
Well, and Dreyfuss was just so brilliant.
Yeah, he was.
I mean, Bill Murray was brilliant, but you really forget not only how funny Dreyfuss was, a lot of the laughs really were the reaction to Bob, but just the sheer enjoyment of watching Richard Dreyfuss be driven crazy.
Yeah.
You know, the way that he chose to play that character, that was half the fun.
Yeah. He did. I mean, sometimes I think, you know, because he and Bill didn't necessarily get along that well on the set. I think that helped. You know, so. They had a big fight, and there's a scene in the movie where Richard gets out of the car and just kind of goes. I don't even remember. It was dialogue, but he just blew it. He was so upset, you know, and they left that in the movie, and it's such an odd moment. He's not really saying anything.
But that's
how Richard was just livid.
But that was the moment where you really got that he was going insane.
Yeah.
Because there was something that was just so that he'd crossed a line in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a lot of worry as we were making it that in a sense that was obvious, and that we had to be careful about, you know, sort of making the Dreyfuss character fall apart very, you know, beat by beat, not ever try to get too broad. And so there was a lot of worrying about getting too broad, and you know, you can make the argument that maybe it does in places, but it sort of has to go where it goes on some level. So,
I just was fascinated by the tone that the writing had. I thought there was an element where it was kind of a cartoon, and these two figures were kind of, in a sense, cartoon figures.
I thought of it as a Roadrunner movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Bob Wiley is Wile E. Coyote,
duh.
you know. So
that was
but without the you know, he's not he's an innocent, really.
Right.
He really played him like he was a
But
child.
the name, at least,
Now
that
you're
was just to
saying it,
keep
no
myself.
wonder.
Yeah.
I felt that. I mean, that's, I think, a beautiful example of that something was in your writer's mind as an image, and even though it isn't anything literal in the script, it infused through the script.
Well, it's
totally
literal.
felt that.
It's because there's that coyote chasing that roadrunner the whole way. I mean, it's just one scene after another.
So how early in the process?
Chase and evade, and that's.
Oh, that's great.
You know.
How early in the process did you get the idea of using the Roadrunner cartoon as a?
Pretty much right away. Yeah.
Wow.
Just came to you.
Yeah,
Here you go, guys.
It seemed like this persistent patient to me. That was when I started thinking about the scenes. That's what I was reminded of, and that was the way it
So
sort
that
of.
gave you a sense of this is something, this is like a template that I'm going to kind of go back to, use, exploit. I mean, I think it's interesting. We've been talking about like things, things that you're going to find that either come into your mind or, they come into your life at that point where that is going to be something you can lay on top of the process that kind of gives you something more to lean on.
Hopefully, I mean, to me, it was a way to use repetition for comedic effect, like they do in the cartoons, versus a monotonous or predictable
Oh,
effect.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, again, watching it, and I was in the Groundlings comedy group, so I thought of it in a different way. She thought of it as the cartoon, but I thought this is really a sketch. How do you take essentially what's a very simple sketch idea and expand it into a whole movie?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be my worry as a writer, is how do you keep it from being repetitive? Did you go back and watch the cartoons?
I didn't have to.
No.
I watched them obsessively as a kid. So, they're yeah.
They're part of
They're yeah. So, but it's what I always loved about that cartoon was just the inevitability of what was going to happen, and the way it surprised you in the way it happened, and they're always throwing an anvil from a different direction or
Right.
something that you don't expect, even though you expect everything. So that was the challenge, or the one I tried to set anyway for myself, was to surprise the audience and even myself with the way that these characters behave toward each other, and particularly with the way Marvin tried to get rid of Bob, just little things like, I'm going to write you a prescription for your problems, just these ways of trying to
right.
out
to
of the
cleverly
blue stuff.
outsmart him.
Yes, if possible.
Well, it's smart because it plays the guy. It took that character seriously, and you played him to the top of his intelligence, and then still got him with this crazy guy.
Right. Well, it's pretty hard to shake Bob. It got, after a while, it got very hard to invent ways. I mean, when Bob starts saying, what is this, death therapy? That's brilliant. Death therapy. You're brilliant. I mean, you can't win anymore.
And then he never even got upset when the house really did blow up.
No, I mean, it's just whatever you're doing to me, it's your brilliant way of saving me. You love me so much that you would do all this horrible stuff to me. I mean, it just...
But that does remind me of, you speaking of sketches and improv, that does remind me of the classic rule in improv comedy, which is they call it yes and, which is to always agree. In other words, if two people are improvising a scene, what doesn't work, and especially becomes tiresome for the audience, is just, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't, which amateurs will fall into. And what real improv people say is to do yes and, which is to agree with what's coming at you and heighten. And so that's what you actually were doing, I realized, with Bob, is he would always agree.
Yeah.
He would always go, that's wonderful, or whatever he would say, and then he would heighten that moment, bring it to even a higher moment, like we're best friends now.
Right.
I mean, and that's a natural use of a certain kind of comedic situation.
Didn't even know I was doing it.
You didn't, but it's interesting. I mean, my husband's an improv actor, and Robin did a lot of improv, and I think about it a lot, and I think it's just an interesting thing to realize that in a movie that has a sketch-like quality, that you went to that naturally for yourself.
Desperation, I'm sure.
When you went to initially do the brainstorming with yourself part of it, you had this instinct that you really like this idea.
Right.
And then you go off, and then what is your process? Do you just start saying, these are all the things, this is what's wrong with the guy, or where did you start?
I thought to myself, I think first, what kind of character would Bob have to be? Just sort of I didn't want to think of him as crazy. I thought that would sort of distance me from him right away. So I started thinking, how needy must a person be to be, so desperately involved with getting in touch with their shrink. So, one phobia after another, one problem after another. It was at a certain point I realized he's got all of them. As long as they don't paralyze him, as long as he can move, even if it's tough to move out of his apartment, as long as he can get to the psychiatrist's office, that's the limiting point. If I can give him as many problems as he can hold, but if it prevented him from getting there, then that's one too many. So he's a multiphobic. He's afraid of everything, and yet somehow the desperation of that can drive him to the shrink's office. And then I start thinking, well, what kind of shrink should he be, up against here? And again, it should be someone top of their game who should be referred by another shrink who's jealous of Leo Marvin's success.
Although it was played that he was, it seemed like it was played just that he wanted to get rid of Bob.
Well, he did,
and knew that the other guy was vain.
Yes.
Or
Well, Leo Marvin is, and when Richard Dreyfuss read it, the script started with a narration. It was a bunch of psychiatrists sitting around on a lake, talking about the worst patient they ever had. Each one chipping in, and one kind of goes, the worst patient, I never had him, but Bob Wiley. And they go, see that place over there? And they point across the lake, and it's just a fireplace. The house is burned down. They go, remember that was Leo Marvin's house? And they go, oh yeah, what happened to him? He goes, Bob happened to him. And somebody goes, Leo Marvin, oh yeah, what an asshole. And they go, yeah, and he got what he deserved. Yeah, well, tell me about it. Well, Dreyfuss read that and said, I don't want to play an asshole. And you're going, well, he kind of is and he kind of isn't.
That.
Right. So, but
he's made his whole career doing that.
But he's never been called that.
Right,
so,
it wasn't in black and white.
For 6 weeks. And we wanted to show our appreciation. They have done this totally out of the goodness of their hearts, and
now it's all worth it.
So we just wanted to thank them for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We have a whole another hour to go, but Winnie and I have talked about the fact that we got exactly the right students for this class, even though you didn't really know exactly what this class was that you were going to be taking, but we... This has been really wonderful. And oh my God, the flowers are gorgeous. So anyway, we're really happy that you guys did this. We will do this again at some point in the future. And because it's been really fun.
It's been fun, and we'd like to do it again, and we'll do it in some kind of a way that'll be even more interesting, and
if possible. Now we're going to take more questions, and then to close out the evening, we're going to close out the evening in the series of classes in a typical weird Winnie and Robin way. So we want to leave about 5 minutes at the end.
Yeah, we need
for the weird
kumbaya kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of. We talked. We're going to just go short of everyone holding hands or hugging. You can flee before if you want.
Oh, you can make a getaway.
You don't have to stay for it, but it is going to be a little special little something.
Should we take? Should
Yes.
we take more questions, Devin?
First of all, I want to say thank you guys so much for inviting us all into your living room. It's like it's like having lunch with you guys, except no food. But thank you, except lots of food for thought. So thank you. So it's just been an amazing experience. Really, thank you. My question, Tom, is you've had such a long and successful career. I'm wondering if you would talk or is it true in your experience that the changes in the medium of filmmaking and the changes in the way films are made and has affected how you write a script and the demands and how you might write a script?
Well, it's a tough question because I think the changes in the business are kind of obvious because with the conglomeration of the studios, there are fewer and fewer movies, and the studios are partnering up on movies, so there, even that many fewer movies. And now they don't really want to make anything that's not in some way a guaranteed sale. It's got to be based on a big book or a big comic strip or some kind of
Or
franchise.
an amusement park
Yeah,
ride.
yeah, just something that already exists so that they know an audience will come. So, given my tendency to write originals, they're a harder animal to sell. So for me, it's made it tougher. And I guess it's just to the extent that it's narrowed the choices and created more competition to the point where there's just not that many assignments, and the sort of bruising gauntlet you have to go through to get those assignments is basically to get an assignment you have to write the whole script as a pitch. You have to be ready to go
So
in.
you have to do that too.
Yeah,
Wow.
everybody does, as far as I can tell. If it's an original, if you're lucky enough to sell a pitch, then obviously it doesn't have to be as extensive. But if it's, if they want you to come do whatever their next theme park ride is, it's just an all-out war between however many writers there may be, and they'll never tell you how many. They call it a sweepstakes. Actually, they have that technical term for it. It's in the minimum basic agreement, sweepstakes. So it's kind of demoralizing. I used to have a sense that if you could dream of something and dream of something good, that it would get made. And now the double think and the triple think and the fear is just has put a big chill on that. On the good side is that all the studios now own smaller divisions, like Warner Independent and Fox Searchlight and so forth, that are making the kind of movies that are more to my taste anyway. So, but it also means a huge cut in your price and sort of living a different way. For me, the lucky thing is I've made a good living up till now. One kid's in college and the other one's college is paid for, so I can take, if I want to, and find something, I can take a step back. And in fact, I'm trying to direct a movie for fairly little money, but it's something that I love. But it's going to be a smaller specialty division versus a major studio. So it's changed, and it's much more youth film oriented, much more effects film oriented. They will tell you that if the movie that you're pitching doesn't cost at least $80 million, they're not interested, because the effects, if the effects don't, if it isn't that expensive, it doesn't have effects. And the only reason people want to go see movies, in their mind, the only guarantee they can get people into movies are effects. So it's not a good time.
I wonder what the fallout from Borat's going to be. Now we don't need writers at all.
Oh, that's right.
All we need
Right.
is a genius.
Yeah. Well, it's
He's
there
a
were-
writer, though.
Yeah, Borat's. Sasha's a writer, but
but
right,
because it's that.
improvised.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. It'll be another nightmare.
Something else for you to worry about.
Exactly. So
And tomorrow, the
yeah.
elections.
So
for
the
today.
shrinkage, of the marketplace is really ultimately the problem, and it just makes it that much harder for all of us. And I used to tell people, write what you love, and it'll get there. And I'm not sure that's really true anymore. It may get you to the point where somebody hires you to write something they love, but they may never make your pet project, because the economics of it are just, if squeezed out, movies that are in the middle. Only really low budget movies and really high budget movies are getting made.
But don't you have to do that initially anyway, just
do.
to attract somebody?
You do, but look at the end product. Is that what you want to do? Do you want to write the next theme park ride? Do you want to write the next graphic novel to film? Those are the kind of movies they're making. Now, maybe this will all change, and the kinds of things. I grew up with European films and what they used to call A pictures. Even things like Chinatown and The Godfather, and movies that could have dark endings or unhappy endings, things like that. They just don't do anymore.
God, I remember
So-
when I was in high school going to see Midnight Cowboy,
That's right.
Last Tango in Paris.
None of that would get. Most of that
No.
would be just wouldn't get made. I don't think. But so it's a little demoralizing, and it's a different business. It's always been a young people's game, but it's much more so now than ever.
Can I ask you something, Robin?
Yeah.
When you said to him, when you said to Tom, that's the kind of thing that makes you want to be a straight guy, a straight white guy.
Right.
What did you say?
Yeah.
What did that mean what I thought it meant, which is that as a woman.
That they fought and somehow or other, that they could get in a fight.
Yeah.
They could annoy each other to the point of fighting, and then they would go shoot it.
Yeah. I just felt like I don't know how I would have kept at that argument, because I would have felt like I had no rights anymore to keep talking.
I was sort of young and naive, and I have to say that in those days, as bad a reputation as Disney had, at least Katzenberg, and he kept me, I was in the room in every discussion we had about my movies, you know, and he just gave you the feeling you could say whatever you wanted to say. I mean, he might disagree, may beat you down for saying it, but I started to realize that he didn't mind arguing. So, and frankly, if you believed in something, you had to fight to keep it. They would chip away everything. They could call you up on a Monday and go, I love this new scene, I love this, and the next day go, you know, we're not so sure, we're not going to shoot it. And you would have to fight, and if you fought hard enough, they would go, oh, okay, maybe we'll put it on the schedule. So it you know, it was a good environment in spite of all the sort of
I just find that really inspiring.
It
just
doesn't
to hear
happen that
it,
much now. Now you'd be called difficult.
Right, and I wouldn't even be there probably.
Right.
But
you'd be there, but as soon as you start fighting for what you believe in, you get a reputation for being difficult.
Right, and they replace you, or
yeah, they fire you. It never even occurred to me that I might be fired. I mean, they made it feel that
you
much.
were part of it.
Just you're part of the team,
Right.
And you know we're not happy with the scene, but we're not going to fire you.
But there
because
still
we're not
must be
happy with the
people who
scene.
work that way. I mean,
I don't know who they are. I don't even. I really don't. Nowadays, it's a kind of chilling. You know, you come in. I mean, first of all, most of the movies they make are their ideas, not our ideas. So when they hire us, they know what they want, and if we don't want to do it, they'll get someone who will. So it's a different kind of, you know, back then there was a much bigger mix of originals and ideas generated by the studio. In fact, the studio didn't generate that many. They tried. Jeffrey, I mean, he knew I wanted to direct, so every so often he would come to me and go, you know, we've got this idea that if you can go.
The movie that he was obsessed with was Pretty Woman. He kept wanting to remake Pretty Woman. I mean, in all sorts of different ways.
He had this thing called Off the Floor, which was he wanted to recreate the Copacabana era. And he thought he would have a movie about a restaurant that wants to be like the Copacabana of years past.
Off the Floor, what a great title.
And it was about the waiters and waitresses at that restaurant. And he would come up to you about every 6 months and go, I know you want to direct, we just got this great idea in. And he would pitch it to you, and you go, you pitched me that 6 months ago. Oh, yeah, but it's a great idea. Let's develop it, let's do it. And they never got anybody to do it. So it was.
I love what's called an idea, like a movie about waiters and waitresses.
Yeah.
Go off and, you know, put the finishing touches on it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was my idea. It's like, how is that an idea?
Somebody once said to me, I'm sorry, this is such a non sequitur, but oh, this thing is going to write itself. And I said, well, as long as I'm going to be the one in the room while it's writing itself, can we talk about it some more?
I just had to ask about that because that's just one of the things that is just hit me when you were talking. I just know that I would have crumbled. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe under that circumstances I wouldn't have.
If you had seen the scene they were going to shoot, you would not. I mean, it was terrifying. I mean, to me, suddenly to have worked on a movie for almost
and have
2
it just
years
undercut.
And just have something that doesn't work be the only option for the ending after we've done all these other things that are at least logical. This was scary. So I was terrified really to not fight for it.
Well, I guess maybe that's when you do fight. Is when I just want to really say I respect you for standing up for yourself at that moment because I think it's very hard.
Whether it was motivated by terror or not, but it's hard to keep standing up and saying,
especially when you have no support.
Thing that you know, when you have no support and you're just saying that unpopular thing.
Yeah,
but
that's hard.
eventually prevailed.
Yeah, well, at least I got him to shoot them both, so that
Oh,
was
It's incredible.
it's still a shock to me. that
That's
Jeffrey
amazing. Like
did
you
that.
watch the movie and you're expecting it. Well, you won't watch the movie, but
I mean, but that Jeffrey just suddenly turned on a dime like that and said,
it's
"Okay,
amazing.
do it."
It's a
I mean,
great
it was-
moment.
yeah,
It's a great character moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fight for that. You told
True.
us a couple
Actually,
weeks
I
ago.
fought for more things than that in
yeah,
Wicked.
so
So,
if it means
yeah,
something-
actually, I fought for a lot more things than that. So
But my question is, with What About Bob?
I had to forget.
It's as much as I love the Roadrunner analogy. It seemed to me that the real thrust of the movie was the character arcs and how they played out and intersected. And I was curious, when you were outlining it, did you do that separately? Did you chart those out in any way, or did you just keep them in the back of your head when you were coming up with scenes for the movie?
Well, I knew where they were both going. So, the arcs, as they call it, are just sort of a natural part of the progression of the story for me. I'm going to take Leo from this smug, on top of the world guy to this broken down, Hulk at the end. So it's just, and Bob's going to do it by just constantly pushing on him, and being that pin that pricks the balloon. So I don't keep in my head sort of a notion of, here they're going from, A to Z, but I can feel it as I go through the story.
So you didn't choose scenes based on...
No, I
getting
mean, I just, I could feel the deterioration in his character through each scene I was doing, and that's how I knew the scene was working. I could just feel Bob getting under his skin more, feel him wanting to break down more. I mean, you kind of live each character yourself as you write it. I mean, that's you're kind of I think improvisation is a great, in fact, almost every writer I know tried acting at some point, and it's a great tool to use, and I suggest it to everyone to go do some acting somewhere, whether it be improv or just, go to a theater, because it really shows you what a scene is made of, what's going on in a character, and to have to get up there and feel it is a great way to have to do it as a writer. And then to learn to do it as a writer. So
It's also a good way. We've talked a lot in the class about just getting out of the way of your own self.
yeah.
And letting that other part of you come up. And last summer I took an acting class, and I don't want to be an actor, but I just knew I had to do something to shake it up and,
Reinvigorate yourself.
reinvigorate myself and do something that I didn't have a lot of mastery at, that I knew was going to be a challenge for me. And that some stimulation would come from somewhere. But I think it's a good idea just in general. But it's, if you guys are feeling stuck, or it's another good way to bring in stimulation in addition to having that sense of what it's going to feel like for the actor to play that part. And you're improvising with yourself.
That's right.
So Tom, you feel like when you're sitting there, do you actually talk out loud the way I do? I mean, do you actually say stuff out loud?
No, I don't think so. No one's ever caught me, so I haven't heard myself do it.
You don't even say the lines out loud?
No, because I once or twice I tried that, and they just sounded so weird coming out of my mouth that no. I mean, I can hear them, and I hear myself saying them, but when my own voice comes out.
But you feel like you're feeling the moment? I mean,
Yeah,
you feel like
yeah.
you're beat by beat sort of moving through that emotion.
Well, they're breaking points for every character, I think, and
Describe.
where it's not actually the breaking point for Leo Marvin isn't even in the movie because the director cut it, but there's a point where Bob and Leo were out sailing, and Leo, something happens, Leo gets in the water, and Bob has not even been able to swim, but he jumps out and he starts saving Marvin. And Marvin's going, "Get away from me, I don't want you to save me." And Bob saves him, and while he's saving Marvin, he starts saying, "Maybe this is a good time to talk about my mother." And that's where Leo just completely flips out, and tries to drown himself, and then, and that was, how that got cut was a whole other thing. But I knew I was building to that breaking point. I knew that, that was his breaking point. Bob was the kind of guy that gets broken and then has to invent a new reason to come alive again. It's death therapy. It's whatever possible. He has to ascribe a good motive to Leo. So his breaking point. He breaks in every scene just momentarily, and then invents his new the new way of coming alive again. So so that, you know, that was what I was doing as I was writing it. I think is just getting to Leo's breaking point, and then I
Right.
knew what was going to happen from that point. He was going to do everything he had to actually kill Bob. So and then Bob would have to find ways to make every effort to kill him a way to save him. You know, so I don't know if this answers your question. It's
Yeah, no, it did.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah, yeah.
Do you want to, yeah.
I was wondering, when you were working on What About Bob, how much research did you do into the wonderful world of psychiatry?
Laura Ziskin, the producer's father, was a psychiatrist, and they have a book that enumerates every psychiatric problem.
DSM?
Yeah, and she gave me the DSM, and I looked through that, and you know, everything you want to know about what they can call you and how they would number it if they did was in there. So that was it.
Yeah, your techniques that you used, that you had Leo do, were some real therapeutic techniques.
Well, I had to think. I mean, the baby steps just came to me. I mean, I kept thinking he's got to have a book out. He's just, you know, and if the book has got to be, you know, he actually has to be a decent psychiatrist. He's got to be the answer to Bob's problem. And one day I just thought, you know, just one little baby steps occurred to me, and then that was what would be, you know, the mantra for Leo and his book.
I think he was he seemed real to us therapists in the audience.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write Dead Poet Society? What was your process? Did you use an outline? How did you come to that? And when you finally sold it and they made it, did they make you do rewrites like in this way? Because some of what you're describing that you wrote that was cut was very funny. And that's kind of scary.
Yeah, and why that got cut is a funny and scary
But
story too.
But I will also say that you didn't really need it. I hate
Well,
to say it,
it's
but
funny,
I
but-
mean, it might have been the highlight of the
Don't
movie
hate
for
to
me.
say it, because I think that's
But I
valid.
feel like the movie worked because the actor had the breaking point, and somehow or other it felt, just to me watching it, I didn't go, whoa. You know, sometimes you watch a movie and you know they cut something out.
Right. Well, they never shot it, and I mean, it was one of those things where the first meeting with the director, he said, where do you think the Act 2 curtain is? And I said, well, I try not to think about these things, but I guess it would be at this scene. And he said, yeah, that's where I think it is. He said, where is that in the script? And I said, it's page 95. He said, yeah, it's 5 pages too late. And I said, well, I don't think they mean it that literally. And he said, yeah, I think they do. And he said, it's just it feels a little long to me, and it should be at 90. And I said, okay. He said, so what's your favorite scene in the first half of the first 2/3 of the movie? I said, you mean the old kill your babies thing? I'm not saying. He said, well, I'll tell you my favorite scene, and it was that scene, the scene on the lake. And he said, so that's got to go. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, no, it's too funny to be that early in the movie. It should be in the third act. He said, and I can't figure out a way to put it in the third act. And I said, I can't either. He said, so I don't think we should shoot it. We should just take it out. And I was just sick. But
Oh my God, that is
it was
horrible.
just horrible.
That's
So,
just
you know,
awful
that's how
information.
the sort of the tyranny of these.
That was at
these
your
cl-
first meeting with
Yeah,
him?
yeah.
Oh,
So-
Wow.
yeah. And Frank's a really good guy, and you know, it just, you know, that's part of his process. And I mean, what he was really saying was it was too long, and that scene just, you know, too funny, and it's too soon for the movie to peak. So I mean, on some level, I get it, but it was still disappointing not to even see it shot. But to get to your question, I got the idea for Dead Poets because of two teachers that I had. One, my sophomore in high school English teacher, and another guy named Harold Clerman, who was a Broadway director and head of the group theater, founded the group theater, and a critic for The Nation. And when I got out here and went to USC Film School, I wanted to learn how to work with actors. And rumor was there was a guy named Jack Garfine who had a workshop called the Actors and Directors Lab over in Beverly Hills, and if you wanted to work with actors, that's where you went. So I went over there and enrolled in the workshop and quit USC. And we had the bonus of having Clurman come every 6 weeks because he had been Jack's teacher in New York and review the work of the students at the workshop. So, and Clurman was one of the most amazing teachers and sort of public speakers I've ever seen. He was essentially a human volcano on stage. He would start talking about things with such passion, and he would start small and get big. I mean, if you sat in the first couple of rows, you'd almost have to wear a raincoat because he'd spew all over you. But people would come, I mean, we would come out of there just ready to change the world, you know, and then, you know, you wake up the next morning and realize that not going to happen with me at the helm. But so I had this idea of writing. It kind of made he helped sort of make a group of students come together in almost this worship of him, you know, because we were so blown away with how brilliant he was. So I got this idea about writing a movie about these acting students. And, you know, after a while, it felt kind of Hollywood-like and inbred and all about the same thing. So I gave that up, but I started thinking his voice in that teacher, that English teacher, and more specifically, an English teacher who's kind of focused on poetry. Maybe that would be interesting. And for about 4 or 5 years, I found myself telling that story to people and kind of figuring it out. And then one day, the ending hit me. And I had this idea that, you know, the teacher would be at the school and he would change these students and that there would be some trial at the end for him. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense. They don't have trials for teachers. They just fire them, you know. And but then, you know, suddenly the idea that they would fire him and that the boys would stand up for it, that all came. And then I wrote it. And there were no real fights about that one. That one came, I outlined that thing much more detailed than anything else I'd ever done, and basically wrote it straight out of the outline and changed 2 pages. One major change, which was there was a very short scene 3/4 of the way through the movie where the boys come to class and the teacher's not there and they find out he's in the hospital, and they go and they learn that he has early stages of Hodgkin's disease, which is not immediately fatal, but he knows he's got a shorter time than the rest of us. And he basically gives them some nice little speech about it, and then things proceed as per the rest of the script. And Peter Weir, when he decided to do it, said, you know, I'm going to give you the easiest rewrite you ever had, but it's a major change. We're taking that couple of pages out because it's unnecessary and it ruins the ending and a whole bunch of reasons. And we thought about it for a couple of days, and I realized he was right, and I took it out. So that came out, and then there was one other scene that he shot that just was kind of silly, and I could see his heart wasn't in it, and he said, I don't think I'm ever going to put this in the movie, and he didn't. So that one didn't get any, there were no notes. But they tried to have notes. The first director on the movie, when I sold it, I told my agent, because it was 1 o'clock in the morning, you know, I don't want to sell this to them till I find out what they want to do to the movie. And he said, it doesn't work that way. I've already made the deal. I've closed, you know.
What a great guy.
Yeah, I know. So, and there was another director on it before Peter, and I was terrified. And he said, don't worry, you know, whatever it is, we'll deal with it. And about 3 days later, about 10 pages of single-space notes came, and they were all about things like, you know, the teacher is the main character of the movie, but the movie seems to be about these kids. Let's get rid of the kids. Let's go back and meet the teacher when he's a student, do the first half of the movie there when the society, you know, all this stuff. And I was just, you know, dripping sweat, and the director said, you know, we'll just go in and we'll deal with it. And when we got to the studio, we went into Katzenberg's office, and I remember he was sitting in a chair on his couch looking through the notes, and there was some other executives in there, and we sat down, and he looked through the notes and said to the other executives, he said, who did the notes, guys? And a couple of the executives said, well, you know, it was kind of a team effort and that we didn't really get a chance to polish them. And, you know, and Jeffrey said, well, you're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, aren't you? And he threw him over his shoulder and said, let's just make the movie.
Wow.
And I mean, I could have kissed him right there. It was just an amazing thing. And we just started talking about casting. And that
Wow.
director didn't survive the casting experience, but we ended up with you know, I ended up with Peter Weir, so it was
Awesome
yeah,
character.
yeah. So it was a lucky experience. So I mean, I had a really good experience at Disney, I must say.
Yeah,
all
it
in
sounds
all,
like
all
it.
in all, yeah.
You never thought, I mean, I never thought I would hear a series of stories where Jeffrey Kansler
I
would
know,
be the
I know,
hero,
I
but
know. It's,
Well,
he's coming across
that doesn't mean
well
you should think
tonight.
good things about him, but no,
I want to just highlight this thing you said that I loved, which I relate to, and I know you relate to, which is that you said, I got this image, as you were getting the images for Dead Poets Society plot, you got this image of a trial towards the end of the movie, and you're thinking, that doesn't make sense. Teachers don't have trials.
Right.
That doesn't make sense. And we've talked about this a lot together, where you'll get like a sort of download, a piece of information about your plot, or like a detail, and I literally say those words. I say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why am I thinking that? Or why am I so determined that that has to be that way? It just seems like it's so irrational and so just sort of random. And then I will find the reason, sometimes, months later, why that is in there. You know what I mean? And well, obviously you do know what I mean. And I just think that's an interesting thing, when you're working, not to be too hard on yourself when something like that is coming up, because very often there's just more to be revealed about your own work that you don't know. And as it starts to fall into place, there's a reason why you're clinging to something. I mean, not always.
That's absolutely right.
But it's actually no different than when we were talking about before, in a way, when you're going, you have a bee and you have an ant and you have 10 days. You have a trial that doesn't make any sense, and your mind makes these weird connections. Like every so often you'll have all these thoughts, like you'll have a few things to grab hold of, and then these other things like a trial, I don't know why that makes sense. And almost like I picture almost like something firing, so I see the connection going from here to there, and it gives you the end of your movie. But it didn't have to be a trial. It just happened to be a really good ending for that movie because you saw how it could have meaning.
Well, the trial, as wrong as it was, got me in the position where I at least had the kids sitting in the audience of that trial that didn't make any sense, wanting to be able to stand up and say, no, he didn't do it, or something.
Right.
And then I realized, oh my God, he had this thing about standing up on his desk. Maybe they would stand. And then I thought, but there are no desks, so we got to put them back in the classroom. And there it is,
Yeah.
And it just kind of, and then you go, oh my God, maybe this is a good, now.
Yeah,
to hell
but
with
that-
the trial.
that-
It's
That's when it seems like a
it's-
real
it's-
miracle, where you're just going, how did I think of that perfect thing? Well, maybe on some level you knew it, and maybe in another dimension all this stuff is already written and it just comes to us in pieces. But maybe it's just this random thought that you had that then you fill in the blanks. I mean, that's part of the mystery of what we do.
It really is.
Yeah, that's it. It's just an interesting.
But just don't be
Alarmed.
don't be alarmed, or don't be harsh with yourself if you can help it, because it might be a good idea. It might be as good an idea as anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there more questions for Tom Schulman? Julia?
Well, Tom, I definitely have to disagree with your movies not standing the test of time, because
Sweet, thank you.
I mean, Dead Poet Society and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids are just two of my all-time favorite movies. I watched Honey, I Shrunk the Kids a million times when I was a kid. It's one of my favorite movies. And then when I went to the video store today to rent What About Bob, it's not there. And, it's just things like that I know people are still watching this movie and renting it, years and years and years later. So, and it was overdue, and I was really pissed off. But anyway, my question was about you. On your credits, it says that you were one of the producers on Indecent Proposal, which happens to be another one of my favorite films. And I was just wondering, how did you get involved with that project, and just what your role was in it?
My next door neighbor, a guy named Alex Gartner, and I used to play ping pong every morning at 6 o'clock in my basement. And one morning he came in and he said, I've been reading this book. It's really got a great idea, but the original Indecent Proposal was about an Arab and Israeli guy. And so it ended up sort of being a stand-in for the Arab-Israeli wars about this woman. He said, but it's, and the idea is this millionaire who pays this guy, pays this couple $1 million for a night with. So we just thought that is such a good idea, and sort of put a pin in it. And I then I had an office at Paramount at the time, and he gave me the book, and I took it and left it on my desk. And by the time I came back from lunch, my assistant, who was 21 years old, just getting married, said, "Wow, this is great." And I said, "What?" She said, "I wish somebody would give my boyfriend and me $1 million for a night with me." And I said, "Janelle, you're getting married. You're good." She goes, "Oh, it's no big deal. We just take the money. It would be great." And then later in the afternoon, I heard her talking to her friend, Stacy, who was also getting married, about it. And I thought, wow, they're just really fired up about this thing. So Alex and I talked, and we went in to see a guy named Teddy Z, who was a producer at Paramount, and Teddy bought it. He came back and said, yeah, they'll buy it. And I actually don't know who there bought it, because we thought we should get a woman to write this. It should be told from a woman's point of view, so we got Amy Holden-Jones to write it. And we turned in her script. By that time, Paramount had changed hands, and let's see who had been fired. I can't remember who had been fired, but Gary Lucchese was running the studio. And Gary calls me on a Monday morning and goes, "I've got to buy this script. I know you're the producer. I've got to buy it. Let's have lunch." So I didn't tell him that they owned it already. And we sat down, and he had 3 executives, and he was just going, "We've given you an office on the lot. We love you. We'll make your next, but we have to have this. How much do we have to pay the writer? How much?" And I just started letting them start making offers on it. And finally, when I'm going, I got to show it to Disney too, because they're making my other movies. He's going, no, I'll write a check. Finally, I said, "You idiot, you own it already." He goes, "What?" I said, this has been in development for 2 years. He went, "Oh my God, we're making this movie." Blah, blah, blah. So they made it, and that was, Amy did a great job with the draft, and it was fun.
Why didn't you do the writing on the project?
Because, first of all, my commitment to her when we hired her was that I would not rewrite her. I don't think, as one writer hiring another one when you're the producer, to sort of even have that hanging out there, I think is a bad thing. And she didn't need my help. She did a great job. I think her first draft, instead of being an architect, the Woody Harrelson character owns a construction company. We decided that was not as good an idea, because there should be a kind of choice in there, as opposed to someone who so desperately needs the money they have no choice. So we changed it to an architect. That changed a few things down the line, and that was it. So Amy, totally delivered.
Originally, like before you hired Amy.
I never read the book. I knew that the Arab-Israeli thing was just not, once Alex told me where that went, how it became all about the Arab-Israeli war, it just didn't sound like the movie that we wanted to make. We wanted to sort of, contemporize it and make it an American
So
movie.
was it Amy's idea to come up with the contemporary couple?
It was,
Or
no,
to get
I think that
collectively?
was part of all of us knew that needed to happen.
But there wasn't a moment in time when you were tempted to write it yourself?
No. Mm-mm.
Because you saw it as from the woman's point of view, and you wanted a woman writer specifically?
Yes, it seemed to me that I knew that I just couldn't give it what I thought a woman could give it, and that's, it is to some extent, dark as it is, a sort of fantasy.
No question.
And
Yeah.
I just, not a fantasy I could relate to in the same way as if so it felt like, and I admired Amy's work and sort of had wanted to work with her. And that miserable project that I was writing, the one that I told you I had so much trouble with,
Yeah.
that was the thing that was driving me crazy at the time, and I wouldn't have been able to get out of that and do this if I had wanted to. So it seemed like, as a producer, the smart move was to just get somebody else who I knew could deliver. So that was her.
I think it's interesting and smart to know that even though it might be politically incorrect to say, I think that is a major female fantasy, and that's what the whole movie was tapping into, and I think it's just clear-eyed and intelligent to be able to know that that's what you had.
Well, with my secretary
Right.
and her friends kind of out there going, "Oh, please give us." I mean,
Right, it was
it
just
was kind of obvious, but yeah.
well, I could see it was obvious, I guess,
And,
to
and
you.
of course, a lot of people thought, my wife was going, "Oh, this is immoral. This
Well,
is
exactly.
ridiculous."
I mean, 'cause
you
it's the
wouldn't sell
kind
me
of
for $1 million, would you?
Exactly.
So that it felt like it was going to be something people would talk about.
There was,
Totally,
Yeah.
I
totally.
remember the writer after that movie came out, there was an episode of Mad About You where they were in Vegas, and then the end of the episode they were at a craps table, and some guy comes up to Helen Hunt and says, I'd like to have sex with you for $1 million, and they look at each other and they go, yeah. Okay, and she just walks off with him, and that was basically
Right.
that was basically
that
what
was
your reaction
Janelle,
was.
my assistant. Yeah.
I
Exactly.
think already pre-discussed it, like that if it ever happened, sure.
Oh no, it was just like it wasn't even a discussion. $1 million. I'll go have sex with
Yeah.
that person.
Good.
I'll see you later.
Done.
And see you at the
Right.
room later.
Forget all this drama.
Done.
That's
Done
right.
and done.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. You have dinner. I'll go have sex with him. Yeah.
See you later.
Leave a big tip.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. It's like it would have been more of a choice if the guy wasn't, so good looking.
Well, we had originally, actually, Adrian Lyne, who directed it, wanted Tommy Lee Jones, which I think
Better.
I'd
which would,
rather have
yeah.
sex with Tommy Lee
Well,
Jones.
well, but
That's just me though.
but yeah,
No, but it's
So-
it makes it better, I think. if I may
we
say.
thought so too. But it was a fight, and we ended up with Redford. So.
Right. No,
Well, it's a more pure version of it,
yeah.
which is what.
I think the Tommy Lee Jones version is pure. I
Oh,
think.
would you
I
just do it?
Yeah,
I
I
do
just
too.
then it's
Yeah.
just from, and then there's no fantasy about this. It's not like.
Well,
you
I
have
beg to
think
differ.
yeah.
I mean, I actually think
Well, right,
that
okay.
I think that Redford's a little, for all his gorgeousness, and I admire what he's done with his career. He's a brilliant man, but I think he's a little bit passionless,
Mhm.
and it's hard for me to picture him actually doing that. Whereas Tommy Lee Jones, you could picture that in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's why to me it seems
Yeah.
like it might be more fun in the long run.
It's silly.
But,
Why am I saying that?
Anyway.
Did you have a question? Did you have a question?
Oh,
No.
over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's one
This
over there.
gentleman
yes.
in
I
the
thought
back
I
there.
saw something in the
Back
back. Yeah.
there.
Did you?
Oh,
Renee.
Here we go.
Did you have a question?
I did.
No. Okay.
I did. Since you're writing from 9 to 5 or 10 to 4 every day, when do you do your research or your reading?
I read, pretty much all the time while I'm writing. I'll take breaks. I read all through lunch. I read after, from 4. I'm just kind of reading all the time I'm not writing. But I don't really do research per se unless I have to research the subject. I mean, if I'm writing something, I'm reading about it somehow. But so the answer, the short answer is I read until I fall asleep at night, which is a bad habit because then I wake up hours later and need to read to go back to sleep and so forth.
But then when do you watch reality TV?
Yeah. It does get in the way of, and I try to take, it's bad to stop writing. I mean, it's really bad. I think if I stop for a week or two, it's just so tough to get back. But sometimes I try to take a month off and just, take a stack of books and try not to write, which is fun. I mean, I'll end up making a lot of notes, but I don't, it's a good, you have to refuel that way. Weekends, I try to take weekends off. I end up, sort of not. Some Sundays I always take off.
And you're still married, Noel.
Yeah, yeah, and it really annoys my family because not so much the hours I keep, but the fact that when I'm not writing, I'm still kind of not there. I'll be at dinner and everybody's watching something on television. They'll go, "That was funny." I'll go, "Kind of what?" Yeah,
Right.
Tom's not here again. Dad's
Right.
never here. Dad's never home. It's bad. I just my mind wanders, and it's a disease, but
It is.
Well, also too, I mean, sometimes it's hard for the real world to compete. Not only it's what your job requires,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
I think
Sometimes I'd rather be in there than
Sometimes. To me, I have this compulsion about getting done and this fear about it being bad when I get done. So the two together sort of make me just compulsively work on it. So that, and I guess the internal monologue is, if I could just figure this out now and get it over with, then I'll be out of all this anxiety and pain. So
I have the
to
exact
do it
same
every
thing,
day.
but, I mean, mine doesn't work that way. Mine is like I put it off for that
Oh,
same
I can do
reason.
that too. Sometimes I can get into a great, what I'll do is, if I have an assignment, I'll work on everything I can possibly work on except that assignment until I absolutely have to. And I'll start out going, wow, I'm completely outlined. If I just do 3 pages a day for the next, 40 days, I'm in great shape. And, sure enough, 8 days before it's due, I go, oh God, okay, it's 12 pages a day.
So actually, you had 2 extra days on Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yeah. I always end up writing them in 10, 12 days. I mean, it's just. And
Now I feel better, much better.
Why. And but once you're outlined, it's just not that much. You're through those pages in no time because it's kind of all there.
Do you ever show anybody your outlines, or are they really just for you?
Yeah, just for me. I mean, I used to tell the stories a lot, and then you start losing friends that way. So I just kind of stopped doing that, and show them the drafts as opposed to tormenting them with the stories. And I also find that the more I tell the story, the less I want to write it.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
We've talked about that here.
Yeah, it diminishes the urge almost.
It's just, you tell it and a couple times and it just goes dead.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I've learned that the hard way, actually.
Yeah.
I've even done that with you, I think. And you finally say to me, just go write the scene. Like, I'll tell you, this is what the scene's going to be. This is what the scene's going to be. Did you have a question? Yeah.
I didn't.
You did.
No, I didn't until you insisted I did.
Okay.
But then I thought, nobody gets to look at your outlines, right?
No.
What do they look like?
Well, nobody gets to look at them. So.
But you can describe it, right?
My process is that I make notes on paper usually. I carry a little notebook in my wallet. I had one specially made for my wallet, and then had a lifetime supply of little pads made for it, because they stopped making the pads that go in there.
I like that.
It's kind of sad because I went downtown to this really sweet old lady who made like 4,000 of these. And she said, what are these for? And I said, they're my lifetime supply. And she goes, oh, I'll never see you again. And I said, not unless I live to 85. And she said, well, I won't be alive then. And I said, So anyway, Anyway, so
it sounded like a lot of fun.
It was one of those old printing stores that you realize that there's just not much life in printing left. And
Was it real or a mirage?
Exactly. So anyway,
sounds like a Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah. Anyway, so I make
Little
notes
old
on
lady
that
in the
pad,
printer.
and I make notes next to my bed, and then I type them into the computer. And when I have, 70 or 80 pages of notes like that, I start organizing them. I used to cut them out on the floor and kind of move them around like giant note cards, but except they were little strips of paper, and I'll put I'll go, oh, this belongs in the beginning, and this is a middle, this is an end, and then I just get more specific, and then I have all these strips, and I tape the strips into a notebook so that it's about 200 pages of these strips all scotch taped into the notebook. And if I need to move a strip, I can meticulously take it out and move it to, from page 1 to page 70. And I have to be careful that I leave space on every page so that new strips can move in. It's, it's
making this
really
up?
a
What?
Yeah.
What about Tom?
Exactly. So.
No, really, how do you really outline?
That's.
Then how do you really outline?
It's pretty sick. So,
It is endearing.
yeah, you wanted to know. So that's the outline, and that outline is so detailed. And while I'm moving the strips around, it's the best time, because while I'm reading it, I just any idea that comes, I'll just write out another strip and put it somewhere else. And that's the writing process of the whole script, putting those strips in that book, because I connect scenes that way. How am I going to make this scene work with that? Ooh, what if I do this? And just inventing as I go. That's the best time. And when it's done, I've basically written the whole script. I have whole blocks of description, dialogue. it's 90% there, and that's why at that point writing it in 10 or 12 days is just no big deal. Each strip, it can be anything from a word, you know, the color of the walls, to a line of dialogue, to a strip can be a whole block of dialogue. It can be, you know, a description of the character. It can be what's, you know, a scene about the dog. You know, it can be anything. And so those things just go, you know, they're any degree of specificity you can think of. So it's very loose and not that well thought out. but and I do less, you know, now that I spend more time on the computer and do, you know, cutting and pasting that way. I've been trying to do it like that as opposed to these strips.
But maybe there's something about literally the physical process of it that's helpful to you.
Absolutely. And it's just, you know, during the time I'm moving the strips, it's kind of like playing with little toy soldiers or something. I feel like I'm a kid playing. That's the playful part and the part of it that really feels good when I love doing it. The rest of it is just the hard work of making it right, you know.
That playful aspect we've talked about together in class with this group of people, and just talking about like just how important it is to let yourself get to that access, that part of you, which is not always easy because it's people defend that part of themselves and guard it, but that is the part you want to unleash. And it's just really beautiful that you found a way that just does it naturally, organically, which is I think what people find when they find it. I mean, they find some organic thing that unleashes that childlike innocence, you might almost say.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just think there's something like recently I was doing something. I took a writing class. This guy Jack Grapes, thumbs up Jack Grapes, but at the end of it, you made this what he called a chap book. It was like a little short pieces, and you literally would, you know, make it into like a pamphlet almost, and you would glue it in, and it just made me so happy. Now the pieces were already written, but there was something about that physical act. I can really see how I think it's really neat, even though
it's really neat. I'm sorry I mocked it before.
No, but it's just there's just something so
it's neat.
You know, so neat about it, but because it is labor intensive in the time of computers. But I guess what we're saying now is that maybe that's why it's
that's how he's focusing,
because it gives you a little
it's
activity.
Like, he's focusing
while you're thinking of the movie.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was a kid, I used to build all these forts, you know, out of Scotch tape and paper, and that's basically, I guess, what I'm doing.
Now I'm in love with
strips on the floor.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah. So if you built forts, this will work for you.
Did you have a question? Oh yeah.
We've got 5 more minutes, just a reminder.
Okay.
It's because it's.
But also the
we'll take
gentleman
your
in front.
question and then the gentleman, and then we'll. Yes, you
that's
Margo,
a fascinating. Yeah, that's a fascinating. That was fascinating to hear how you outline your scenes and how you do your book. I have 2 questions. One, I wanted to know, like, do you have a huge storage unit for everything you've ever done somewhere? But the other thing is, and this is to the entire panel, I guess. I always wonder when I'm writing, like, it's fun to try. Sometimes you're writing a scene or you're halfway through 6 scenes past and you're like, oh, I could try that other scene this way. And I never know exactly, like sometimes I feel like I have way too many versions of something in my computer, and then I put all the scenes at the bottom, or then I write the 4 scenes in the 4 ways and I save it. Do you have any method for how you organize your script when you know where you want to go, but you're still trying to figure out, is a scene better if I write it this way or that way? And you still don't want to let anything go, and then, you know, your pages are off because you're really at page 60 when you've written it 3 times, so it's 75. Like, any tips on organization of all that?
Well, I do exactly what you're talking about. I almost always, especially if it's a key scene, but almost with there's so many scenes I do this with. I usually have several versions that I write that are I'm just playing with them, and I just let the script not reflect right page count. And it's not an answer, because I mean, if it's bothering you, it's bothering you, but I just can't not do it that way. I really do need to. I just have noticed this even when I'm in a notebook, like, in other words, if I'm on a legal pad and I haven't moved into the computer yet, I tend to, if I write a scene, I just automatically will write more than one version of it, because I just can't decide right then. And then often it's almost like a popularity contest of what are my favorite lines from either, let's say, version or maybe a third version, and not all in one day. You know, like I wouldn't want to make that decision in the same day I wrote them all, because I don't think that's going to profit me really. And a lot of times it's like a sort of almost like a line off. If I found some really great lines, I'll go, well, how could these all be in one scene? I think that's what I do. But my page counts are, they're not accurate.
Yeah, I think it always varies. I do a lot of, like if I'm not sure about a scene, I might do the scene in a separate file, and then I just resave it with a slightly different name so that I have all the different versions of it. I think I mentioned one other night I do save pages where I can't, where I'm going to cut pages, but I can't bear to just, you know, throw them out all together, and I have a file called save pages. But I'll have all these different versions of scenes so I know they're there, and then maybe I'll just slug one in, reserving the right in my own mind to change it. And I've done what Winnie talks about too, where it's that best line, or you know, if you can't make the decision, then just agree to not have a decision, and then as you keep writing, you may realize something specific that you need in the scene, which you didn't realize when you were writing it, which is why you couldn't decide, and then you might be able to decide later on. The other thing too is, like, again, you know, I'll talk to Winnie, or, you know, if somebody is aware of the details of what I'm working on, just hearing yourself say it aloud, sometimes you know what you do and don't need, which goes in direct contrast to us saying don't say things aloud. But
what were you?
Life is a mystery.
I mean, I think I just take, if I have 2 or 3 versions of a scene, I'll decide which one I think might be the best. I'll cut the other 2 out and put them at the end. At the end of my draft, I always put 3 asterisks, and then everything that I don't like goes at the end. And then, you know, at some point I'll save a version and then maybe get rid of a lot. And once I'm done, I'll reread everything at the end and decide whether maybe it's not better than what I have in there. But it almost never is. I almost never, you know, revive something from the end that's in the garbage bin, basically. And I don't worry about page count for, you know, a while. It just somehow always works itself out. Somebody will finally say, you know, we're not paying you till you get the pages down. That's how it works itself out.
That's how it works itself out.
And it works out real fast.
Really.
So are we going to take
So we'll
one
take one
more?
last question.
Hi. So I was just wondering about the scripts that you started to write, and then you kind of...
That's the end of it.
I think sometimes, you know, you have good ideas. Maybe you would go back to an idea if it was for some reason more beyond your current maturity or something when you thought of it. But in general, if you're moving forward as a person, you're gonna, you know, you're sort of gonna go, at least I'll get interested in just a new way of thinking or a new way of approaching things, but the subject matter is always the same, or, you know, like some version of whatever my, you know, my obsessions are. I
tend to find that if they don't work fairly soon, they're probably never going to work. You know, seems like the best ones kind of come in 2 or 3 big jolts and they work, and the ones that I just have to beat on forever and, you know, just never quite get there. So
yeah, just because it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it's something that's going to ignite for you.
Yeah, good ideas occur to the wrong person.
It's so hard to do it even when it's going well, that if you can gravitate to the stuff where you have that extra level of flow, it's going to be hard anyway. So those things that seem like good ideas but they're not igniting for you, they may never. Tom, you have it. You're free to go now.
Oh.
Okay. But you can stay for 2 minutes. We're going to wrap up and we're going to give people tarot cards.
Well, let's express our gratitude.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was a
Tom
pleasure to talk to you.
Schulman.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.